Deep in the shadowed hollows of the Ozark Mountains, where the ancient pines whispered secrets to the wind and the fog clung to the earth like a shroud, lay a forgotten holler known only to those who dared not speak its name. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and decaying leaves, a place where time itself seemed to rot away, untouched by the hurried pulse of the world beyond. It was here, in this labyrinth of twisted trails and silent streams, that the Harlan family had carved out their existence for generations, bound by blood and something far darker. Elias Harlan, the elder brother, was a man forged from the rugged stone of the hills, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes like chipped flint that saw too much and revealed nothing. His younger sibling, Josiah, carried the same feral intensity, but with a restlessness that gnawed at him like hunger in winter. They worked the land with calloused hands, felling timber and tending sparse crops, their lives a monotonous grind under the watchful gaze of the mountains. But at the heart of their world was their sister, Lila, a fragile bloom in the wilderness, her beauty a fragile veil over the isolation that had shaped them all. Lila had grown up in the dim glow of kerosene lamps, her days filled with chores and the distant howl of coyotes at night. The brothers doted on her in ways that blurred the lines of kinship, their protectiveness a cage disguised as love. Whispers from neighboring farms spoke of the Harlans' peculiarities, the way they shunned outsiders, the strange rituals performed under the full moon, the unnatural closeness that sent shivers through those who glimpsed it. Yet no one interfered, the mountains kept their own counsel, and meddling invited misfortune. One autumn evening, as the leaves turned to blood-red flames and the chill seeped into the bones, the voices began. At first, they were faint, like the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush, murmurs that Lila dismissed as the wind playing tricks. But soon they grew insistent, slithering into her dreams, speaking of hidden desires and forbidden fruits. Elias and Josiah heard them too, though they never admitted it aloud. The voices promised preservation, a way to keep the family pure against the encroaching decay of the outside world. And in the dead of night, when the fog rolled in thick as smoke, the brothers heeded their call. What followed was a descent into a nightmare veiled in silence, where loyalty twisted into possession, and the bonds of blood became chains. Lila's world shrank to the confines of the cabin, her body a vessel for secrets that the mountains would guard eternally. The voices laughed in the dark, their echoes a harbinger of the horrors yet to unfold, drawing any soul foolish enough to listen deeper into the web. The last bar of cell service vanished the instant Mira nosed the rented jeep past the rusted cattle guard and the hand-painted sign that read Harlan Hollow, "No trespassing" in letters faded to bone. October wind knifed through the open window, carrying the smell of wet hickory and something older, metallic, like a butcher knife left out in the rain. Pines crowded the narrow track so tightly their needles scraped the roof with soft, deliberate fingers, as though the forest itself wanted to read what was written on her skin. She had driven 8 hours from St. Louis without stopping except once, to buy a paper maps when the GPS dissolved into static. Evelyn Harlow's face had stared up at her from the dashboard the entire way, a grainy 1998 yearbook photo, 19 years old, freckles across the bridge of her nose, backpack straps cutting into thin shoulders. The girl had told friends she was taking a shortcut through the national forest to save 2 days on the Ozark Trail. She was never seen again. No body, no pack, no plea scribbled on birch bark. Just rumors that drifted down from the ridges like wood smoke. She asked the wrong question at the wrong porch, walked too far up the wrong creek, looked too long at the wrong pair of pale Harlan eyes. Mira killed the engine at the edge of a clearing where the road surrendered to waist-high weeds. Silence rushed in, thick and listening. No chainsaws, no banjo music, no distant hum of a generator, only the slow drip of water from a tin roof somewhere behind the trees and the soft pop of cooling metal under the hood. She stepped out, boots sinking ankle-deep in red clay that sucked at her like it had been waiting. Fog pooled in the low places, glowing faintly where the last smear of daylight touched it, and every breath tasted of leaf mold and creek stone and something sweet rotten underneath. 3 weathered cabins crouched at the far side of the clearing, windows blind with plywood, porches sagging under decades of honeysuckle and neglect. A single clothesline stretched between 2 locust posts, swaying though there was no wind Mira could feel. On it held nothing but a child's faded dress, sun-bleached to the color of old bone, turning slowly as if someone had just let go of the hem. She felt the mountains lean in behind her, ancient and patient, the way a cat watches a mouse decide which way to bolt. Mira pulled her coat collar higher, tasted the cold on her tongue, and started walking toward the cabins. The mud clung harder with every step, whispering promises to keep whatever walked here. Night came down all at once, the way it does in the hollows, as though someone snuffed a lantern. Myra's flashlight carved a thin tunnel through the blackness, catching on rusted bed frames and broken rockers half swallowed by kudzu. She had circled the 3 cabins twice, finding nothing but mouse nests and the sour smell of raccoon piss, when the wind shifted and carried a sound that made the hair rise along her arms, a low, rhythmic murmur, almost human, drifting from somewhere deeper in the trees. She followed it the way you follow a scream you're not sure you really heard. The path was only a suggestion, 2 wagon ruts filled with black water and last year's leaves. Branches snatched at her sleeves like children trying to keep her from leaving a funeral. After 20 minutes the ground sloped sharply and the air grew colder, wetter, tasting of iron and creek moss. The beam of her light finally landed on the cabin. It sat in a clearing no wider than a tennis court, ringed so tightly by cedar and dogwood that the sky above was nothing but a jagged hole punched in the dark. The structure itself looked drunk, leaning hard to the left, shingles curled like dead fingernails. One window still held glass, spider-webbed with cracks, the others gaped empty, exhaling decades of rot. A stone chimney had collapsed inward, leaving a mouth of blackened teeth. Yet the place felt occupied, the way an abandoned house sometimes does when something inside refuses to admit the family is gone. Myra's boots scraped across the porch boards soft as sponge. The front door hung open a hand's breadth, swaying gently though the air was still. She pushed it wider with 2 fingers and the hinges gave a single, mournful note that seemed to travel straight down into the ground. Inside, the smell hit her, animal fat, wood smoke, and something copper, old blood baked into pine planks by 1,000 summers. Her light swept across a single room, iron bedstead twisted into ribbons, a table missing 1 leg, jars lined along a shelf like specimens in a forgotten museum. And then the voices rose again, clearer now, threading through the walls themselves. Not wind, not imagination, 3, maybe 4, overlapping in a slow, lilting cadence that might have been prayer or argument or lullaby. They were coming from beneath the floorboards, patient and intimate, as though the cabin had grown ears and was whispering to whatever lay buried under it. Myra's pulse hammered so hard enough to blur the edges of her vision. She knelt, pressed her palm to the cold pine, and felt the faintest vibration, like a second heart beating in the bones of the house. The floorboard came up with a wet pop, as though the house had been holding its breath for decades and finally exhaled. Myra wedged her flashlight between her teeth and pried with the rusted tire iron she'd found leaning against the hearth. Splinters needled her palms, but the plank lifted, revealing a shallow cavity no deeper than a grave for a child. Inside lay a tin ammunition box gone green with verdigris and a small leather-bound journal swollen with damp, its pages warped into waves. She carried both to the crooked table, the voices beneath the floor momentarily hushed, listening. The tin opened with a shriek of corroded metal. Inside were Polaroids, edges curled, colors bled to bruised tones, a girl with waist-long auburn hair standing barefoot on this very porch, belly swollen under a threadbare dress, the same girl later, hollow-eyed, cradling a newborn whose face was turned away from the lens, 2 young men with identical sharp cheekbones and pale Harlan eyes flanking her like sentinels. On the back of one photo, in faded ink, Lila, Elias, Josiah, summer 1997. Keep pure. Myra's hands shook so badly the pictures fanned across the tabletop like tarot cards. She turned to the journal. The leather cover was soft as a tongue. Inside, the handwriting started neat, almost schoolgirl careful, then deteriorated page by page into frantic scrawl that clawed at the paper. They say the mountain chose us, Lila had written the first winter. Mama gone, Daddy gone, just the 3 of us now and the voices that live in the cedar. Elias hears them clearest. He says they want the blood to stay strong, the way it was when the old ones came over from Tennessee with nothing but an axe and a Bible. Josiah laughs but he listens too. They look at me different since I turned 16. Like I'm the last jar of peaches in the root cellar. Later entries grew shorter, stained with what might have been tears or creek water. He held me down while the moon watched. I feel it quickening and I don't know whose it is. The voices say it's right, say it's holy, but holy things aren't supposed to hurt this much. The final page was dated 3 weeks before Evelyn Harlow vanished on the trail above the hollow. A single line, pressed so hard the pen tore through. If anyone finds this, tell them the mountain keeps what it breeds. Beneath the table, the floorboards creaked again, slow and deliberate, as though something on the other side had just shifted its weight and settled into weight. Sleep never came that night, the cabin refused to let it. Myra sat hunched over the table, the journal open like a wound, the Polaroids arranged in a crooked timeline she could not stop staring at. Outside, the moon climbed higher, thin and sharp as a scythe, pouring silver through the broken window until the room felt rinsed in old blood. The voices had quieted to a low, satisfied hum, the way a hive settles after the bees have fed. Then the air changed. It thickened, grew warmer, as if the cabin had drawn breath. A scent rose, crushed cedar needles and something cloying, like magnolia left too long in a closed room. Myra's skin prickled, every hair on her arms lifted at once. She looked up slowly. They were there. 3 figures stood just inside the ring of moonlight on the floorboards, translucent yet solid enough to cast faint shadows. Lila, barefoot, belly huge again though the photograph showed her after birth, auburn hair hanging in damp ropes around a face too young for such exhaustion. Flanking her, Elias and Josiah, shirtless, ribs showing, eyes reflecting the moon like animals caught in headlights. Their mouths were moving, but no sound reached Mira. Instead the words arrived inside her skull, slow and syrupy. She comes back to us. The blood remembers. Keep her here. Lila lifted one hand toward Mira, palm up, and Mira saw the wrist was bruised black in the perfect shape of fingers. The girl's lips shaped a single word Mira felt more than heard: run. Then Elias stepped forward, and the floorboards did not creak beneath his bare feet. He reached for Lila's swollen belly with a tenderness that turned Myra's stomach, fingers splaying wide as though feeling for a kick that had not happened in 30 years. The scene rippled. Moonlight flickered like bad film stock. Suddenly Lila was on her knees, mouth open in a silent scream while the brothers held her arms, heads bowed in something between prayer and hunger. The belly convulsed. A dark stain spread across the front of her dress, blooming outward until the fabric clung translucent to skin. Still they held her, murmuring the same phrase over and over, the words now loud enough to rattle the jars on the shelf: pure, pure, pure. Myra's chair scraped backward. The vision fractured, shards of moonlight scattering like broken glass. When her flashlight beam steadied again, the room was empty except for the lingering perfume of rot sweet flowers and the wet imprint of 3 bare footprints leading across the dusty floor toward the place where the boards had been pried up hours earlier. Dawn leaked gray and reluctant through the cedars when Mira finally stumbled out of the cabin, the journal clutched to her chest like body armor. Her boots were soaked, frost glittered on the weeds like broken glass. She had not meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had dragged her under some time after the footprints appeared, and she woke with the taste of pennies in her mouth and the certainty that someone had stood over her, breathing. The trail back to the clearing felt longer, the trees closer, as though the hollow had shrunk overnight. Halfway down the slope she heard the slow scrape of a rocker on a porch and smelled pipe smoke, sweet and rank as burning hair. An old woman sat on the sagging stoop of the nearest cabin, the one Mira had dismissed as empty the day before. She was tiny, bird-boned, dressed in layers of faded calico that might once have been the same dress hanging on the clothesline. Her face was a road map of wrinkles deep enough to lose fingers in, but the eyes, the pale, washed-out blue of Harlan eyes, stared out sharp as new nails. "You're the one been pokin' in the root cellar," the woman rasped, not a question. The pipe bowl glowed as she drew, and the smoke curled into shapes Mira didn't want to name. Myra's throat worked, words sticking. "I'm looking for what happened to Evelyn Harlow." The old woman cackled, a sound like dry leaves dragged across tin. Evelyn asked too. Pretty little thing, thought the mountain would open up and tell her everything if she just smiled sweet enough. She tapped ash onto the boards, it hissed where it landed. "Mountain don't talk to outsiders. It swallows." She rocked forward, joints popping. "Name's Delphia Harlan. Last of the direct line, sept in what crawls around under the dirt now. Elias and Josiah was my uncles, though they was barely older and me when they done what they done. Mama said the voices started with great-granddaddy after the war between the states, said the land was starved for pure blood and wouldn't let no Harlan leave nor let no new blood in. Every generation it gets hungrier. Lila was the prettiest vessel it ever chose." Delphia's gaze slid to the journal bulging under Myra's coat. "You read it all, I reckon. Then you know it ain't finished. The mountain keeps breeding its own keepers. Some of us is born wrong, eyes too close, bones too soft, but the land don't care long as the blood stays thick as creek mud." She smiled then, showing gums the color of old plums, and Mira saw the family stamp clear as a brand, the same sharp cheekbones, the same pale hunger that had looked out from the moonlit ghosts hours earlier. Rain came in sideways just after Delphia shuffled back inside, a hard mountain rain that turned the hollow into a bowl of churning mist and red mud. Mira retreated to the jeep, locked the doors though she knew locks were laughable here, and sat with the journal open on the steering wheel while thunder rolled overhead like artillery. The voices returned with the storm, no longer polite whispers beneath floorboards but a full chorus that seeped through the glass and metal until the cab vibrated with them. At first they overlapped in a babble of hill dialects, Bible verses, half-remembered lullabies, then they sorted themselves into three distinct strands that braided and unbraided inside her skull. Elias spoke first, slow and deliberate, the way a man talks when he's holding a knife he hasn't decided to use yet. She was ours by right. The mountain gave her to us the day she drew breath. Outside blood is poison. You let it in, the land sickens, the crops fail, the babies come out wrong. We only done what was asked. Josiah's voice was higher, frantic, threaded with something that might once have been love. I never wanted to hurt her. I only wanted her to stay. If she left, the hollow would take me instead. It took Mama, took Daddy, took every cousin who tried to run. Lila understood. She cried but she understood. The first time she felt it kick she smiled, said it felt like the mountain itself moving inside her. Then Lila, soft, almost amused, as if she were telling a bedtime story to a child who would never be born normal. They told me it was mercy. That the pain was the price of keeping us all alive. I believed them until the second one tore its way out and they wouldn't even let me name it. After that I started digging at night, fingernails in the dirt under the porch, trying to tunnel far enough the voices couldn't follow. They always followed. The voices rose together then, a confession and a threat braided tight. We broke the circle when we let the girl from the trail see too much. Thought we could add her blood, thin it just enough to quiet the hunger. But she fought. She ran. We had to put her where the roots could finish the teaching. The mountain forgave us because we gave it 3 more after her, quiet ones who never missed by anyone. Lightning cracked so close the jeep rocked. In the white flash Mira saw handprints bloom on the inside of the windshield, dozens of them, small and adult, slick with something darker than rain, sliding slowly downward as the thunder laughed in every Harlan voice at once. The storm pinned her for 3 days. Wind screamed through the hollow like a living thing trying to tear the doors off their hinges, and the creak behind the cabins rose until it chewed the porch steps away one by one. Mira stayed in the jeep with the engine idling for heat, the journal and Polaroids wrapped in a plastic grocery bag on the passenger seat. Every few hours she tried the ignition to charge her phone, every time the screen stayed black, as though the mountain had swallowed the signal along with everything else. On the second night the rain eased to a steady hiss and the fog rolled in so thick she could not see the hood ornament. She needed water, food, anything that wasn't the single warm bottle of Coke rattling in the cup holder. She pulled on her coat, took the tire iron, and waded back to the leaning cabin. Inside, the place had changed. The floorboards she had pried up were back in place, nailed down with fresh shiny nails that glinted like teeth. Water dripped from the ceiling in slow, deliberate drops, each one landing in the same tin cup on the table with a metallic plink that matched her heartbeat. Her flashlight found new things that had not been there before. A cradle in the corner, hand-hewn oak gone black with age, lined with a quilt stained the color of dried liver. On the shelf above it, mason jars filled with dark liquid and pale floating shapes she refused to study too closely. And on the wall, tacked up with rusted square nails, a dozen more photographs no Polaroid could have taken, grainy black and white images of women in various stages of pregnancy, all with the same auburn hair, the same defeated slope of shoulder. Some held infants, some held nothing but their own empty bellies and stared straight into the lens with eyes that looked freshly dead. The blood stain on the floor had spread since the night of the ghosts. It formed a perfect circle now, glossy and wet, as though someone had just finished mopping it toward the center. In the middle lay a single silver locket on a broken chain. Mira knelt, pried it open with shaking fingers. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, Elias and Josiah as boys, arms slung around a girl who could only be Lila, all 3 smiling the same brittle smile. On the reverse someone had scratched with a nail, 1998, she tried to leave so we helped her stay. From under the floor came a soft, rhythmic thumping, like a heart that had learned to beat again after being buried too long. On the 3rd morning the rain stopped as suddenly as a throat being cut. The silence that followed felt louder than the storm. Mira woke stiff and feverish, cheek pressed to the fogged window, and saw that the fog had lifted just enough to show the tree lean. Something moved there, tall, thin, swaying like river grass. When she blinked it was gone. She left the jeep door hanging open and walked back to the cabin because her legs demanded it, because the thumping under the floor had followed her into dreams and would not let her leave without finishing whatever conversation had started. Inside, the air was warmer than outside, humid, almost tropical. The blood circle had dried to a hard black mirror. In its center the locket lay open like a clam, the tiny portrait staring up at the rafters. The thumping stopped the instant her boot crossed the threshold. In its place rose a single voice, not Elias's gravel, not Josiah's whine, not even Lila's exhausted murmur, but something older, layered, the sound of roots splitting stone. It spoke from every wall at once, patient and enormous. You think we are the crime. We are the sentence. The mountain was starved long before the first Harlan set foot here. It learned to feed on stolen Cherokee graves, on smallpox blankets, on every promise settlers broke with the land. It learned that only blood willingly spilled keeps it quiet. The cabin door stood open when Mira stepped out for the last time, though she had closed it behind her hours earlier. Afternoon light, thin and watery, slanted through the cedars and painted the clearing the color of old bruises. She carried nothing now, the journal, the photographs, the locket, all of it had been taken from her hands while she slept, or while she only thought she slept. Her pockets felt light, almost buoyant, as though the mountain had finally decided what she was worth and found it wanting. A child waited at the edge of the yard. He looked maybe 10, barefoot in the cold mud, wearing nothing but a man's flannel shirt that hung to his knees. His hair was the exact auburn of Lila's in the pictures, long and tangled with leaves. The face was wrong in small, precise ways, eyes a shade too wide set, mouth too small, skin so pale the blue veins mapped themselves like rivers. When he smiled, the expression too adult for the childish cheeks, Mira felt the ground tilt under her. You're late, he said, voice layered the way the mountains had been, 3 tones braided into one. Mama's been waiting. He turned and walked toward the tree line, not checking to see if she followed. She did, because the alternative was staying in the clearing where every cabin door now hung open and every window reflected the same small, pale face watching her leave. The path he took had not been there yesterday. It wound upward through laurel thickets that parted for his bare feet and closed behind Mira like teeth. The higher they climbed, the quieter the hollow became, until even her heartbeat felt muffled. After 20 minutes the boy stopped beside a lightning-blasted oak whose roots clutched a slab of granite the size of a car. He knelt, pressed both palms to the stone, and the slab slid aside with a sound like a sigh. A tunnel yawned beneath, hand-dug, shored with cedar posts gone black and slick. The air that rose from it was warm, wet, smelling of milk and iron. The boy looked back once, eyes luminous in the dim. She kept trying to leave, he said, almost kindly. Every time she got close, we brung her deeper. Now she's the deepest part. Keeps the rest of us fed. He extended one small hand, fingers too long, nails ragged and dark with soil. Mira stared at the offered palm and saw, in the lines of it, every photograph she had lost, every page of Lila's journal, every blood-stained quilt and silver locket. The boy's smile widened, patient as bedrock. Come see Mama, he whispered, and the tunnel breathed around them both, eager, already tasting her name.